Commodities Institute podcast. I'm Emily Costa, and it's Friday, the 12th of December, 2025. Thanks for joining me for another deep and considered walk through the forces shaping global resources. Today, we'll take our time, slow it down, and explore a web of developments that stretch from the Caribbean to Beijing, from Brazilian soy fields to European power stations. It's one of those days when every commodity story feels interconnected, even when they sit oceans apart. I want to begin with metals and the quietly escalating tensions within the global zinc market, because this story, though less dramatic than tankers seized at sea, tells us a great deal about the state of global trade. One of China's largest zinc smelters, Zhuzhou Smelter Group, has broken a supply contract with Teck Resources' Red Dog mine in Alaska. It happened under the weight of steep tariffs, the kind that Washington and Beijing hurled at each other earlier this year, before cooling the temperature in the autumn. Even though the two countries have trimmed tariffs, the remaining duties are still high enough to choke the flow of zinc concentrate from the United States into China. Only a handful of kilograms have entered China this year, compared to tens of thousands of tons last year. That drop is so staggering that it ripples directly through pricing, supply chain expectations, and smelter operating strategies. Zhuzhou had to pay a breakup fee to exit the contract, a move that underscores how deeply tariffs continue to shape the industrial metals market despite diplomatic progress. This pivot also shows how global trade isn't just about finished goods or headline-grabbing commodities like oil. It's about these intermediate materials, the feedstock for galvanizing steel, for making batteries, for reinforcing infrastructure. When tariffs distort that supply, the effects compound through manufacturing, logistics, and consumer markets. China is still importing plenty of concentrate overall, but increasingly from places outside the United States, contributing to a reshuffling of long-established trade patterns. From metals, let's move to power, specifically a surprising transformation happening in the United Kingdom that reflects how the world is rethinking energy infrastructure. Drax Group, the company once known for running the country's largest coal-fired power station, is planning to convert part of that Yorkshire site into a data centre as soon as 2027. It's a fascinating example of how legacy industrial sites, once built for fossil fuel generation, are being reimagined to meet the explosive demand for artificial intelligence-driven computing. A 100-megawatt data centre could be only the beginning, with ambitions to expand into the gigawatt range after 2031. And the logic here is simple. A site like this already has access to land, water, and connection to the grid. It's becoming increasingly common for tech giants to repurpose old power plant sites because building grid connections from scratch can take years. Investors weren't expecting such a rapid timeline, so the announcement nudged Drax's shares higher. It's one of the more striking signs of how AI-linked energy needs are shaping the future of power markets. Let's also take a moment to consider China's perspective on natural gas demand. China National Petroleum Corporation's research arm expects natural gas demand to rise by about 5% next year. While 5% may sound modest, in the context of China's enormous consumption base, it represents a powerful shift, especially after a year where demand slightly contracted. Industrial use is expected to be the biggest growth driver, followed by city gas demand as the country continues its march toward further urbanization. The country is also adding gas-fired power capacity at a record pace, though future utilization rates will depend heavily on gas prices and regional policies. The transport sector is adding momentum too, as liquefied natural gas becomes increasingly cost-competitive for large trucks and even ships along China's coastline. Now let's swing to agriculture, a story that illustrates how climate, logistics, and policy collide in very tangible ways. Brazil, the world's agricultural powerhouse, has trimmed its soybean production estimate for the coming season by a little over 500,000 metric tons. Even with that reduction, the country is still on track for a record crop. Irregular rainfall earlier in the planting season forced farmers to replant in some regions, but rain patterns stabilized enough for seeding to move forward at nearly the normal pace. There's an interesting nuance here. Farmers in Mato Grosso, the biggest soy-producing region, have finished planting, but growers in southern regions like Rio Grande do Sul are struggling with dry conditions. These timing issues matter because soybeans are closely tied to Brazil's second corn crop. If soy runs late, corn runs late, and late corn means higher climate risk, sometimes enough to make farmers switch crops entirely. Decisions made in fields today will shape global grain and feed markets months from now. On the other side of the world, China has harvested a record total grain crop, marking a 1.2% rise from last year. That includes increases in rice and corn and a stable wheat crop. The Chinese government has made grain security a top priority, particularly after years of trade friction with Washington. These output gains are the result of investments in technology, machinery, and expanded sowing areas. Even with record volumes, China still imports massive quantities, especially soybeans, but its determination to increase self-sufficiency is reshaping global agricultural flows. Speaking of soybeans, China's state stockpiler, Sinograin, is preparing for its second soybean auction in as many weeks. The goal is to clear space for incoming US cargoes now that Washington and Beijing have reached a trade truce. Even though domestic supplies are ample due to record arrivals from South America, China continues to rebuild its buying relationship with the United States. Let's turn now to oil, because this is the headline that's reverberating through every corner of the market. The United States has seized a tanker off the coast of Venezuela, and multiple sources indicate that more interdictions are being prepared. This is the first time the US has intercepted a Venezuelan tanker since sanctions were imposed in 2019, and the move comes amid a major US military buildup in the southern Caribbean. The ship seized, known as the Skipper, was carrying Venezuelan crude, and the action has triggered alarm among ship owners and operators. Some have already suspended planned voyages, temporarily stranding millions of barrels of crude near Venezuelan waters. The United States is said to have assembled a target list of additional tankers connected to sanctioned oil trades from Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. This raises several questions. How far will Washington go? How will Caracas respond? And what does this mean for global oil balances? Venezuela relies heavily on crude exports for revenue, and US pressure at this moment could squeeze the country's already strained finances. These vessel seizures also intersect with broader concerns about extrajudicial maritime actions, though US officials insist the seizures follow legal frameworks. All of this unfolds while the International Energy Agency has just lowered its forecast for next year's global oil surplus from just over 4 million barrels per day to just under that amount. Stronger demand and reduced supply from sanctioned producers are the main factors behind the revision. Even so, a surplus of nearly 4 million barrels per day is substantial and helps explain why Brent crude is trading below $62 per barrel after falling more than 15% this year. The supply story is changing quickly. OPEC Plus has paused its output increases. Non-OPEC producers, including the United States, Brazil, Canada, Guyana, and Argentina, continue to expand. By contrast, Russia and Venezuela are seeing exports constrained by sanctions. And the IEA notes the emergence of what it calls parallel markets, where crude is abundant but refined fuels remain tight due to limited refining capacity outside China. Before we wrap today's episode, a quick note from the dry freight markets. Jordan has issued new tenders for both barley and milling wheat, adding to active purchasing this week. These tenders are a reminder that grain importing nations remain alert and opportunistic as prices fluctuate and weather-related crop uncertainties linger. As always, these stories weave together into a broader picture, one of shifting trade relationships, geopolitical tension, resource reallocation, and the constant search for energy and food security. The world of commodities never stands still, and today's developments remind us that every policy shift, every rainfall anomaly, every seized tanker sends waves across global markets. That's all for today's episode of the Commodities Institute podcast. I'm Emily Costa. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.